In a faraway galaxy, a powerful alien queen was taken prisoner. She had once ruled a vast empire, but now she was captured, shackled, and sent to a human warlord as punishment.
How?
Her people believed that sending her to the humans would be the worst thing they could do. The humans were known for their strength, but also for their cruelty. It was said that the warlord who had been chosen to hold her was one of the most feared in the entire galaxy. When the queen arrived on Earth, she was surprised by the silence. The human soldiers who had brought her were tense, but not out of fear. They were used to carrying out orders, no matter how strange or harsh they might be. As they escorted her to the warlord's mansion, she couldn't help but notice how different this place was from her own home. The buildings were tall and cold, the sky gray and heavy with clouds. Yet, despite the darkness of her situation, something about this planet felt different from her own people's world. The soldiers led her into a large room. There, standing in the middle of the room, was the human she had been delivered to. He was tall, wearing the kind of armor that spoke of power, but his expression was calm. There was no anger, no hatred. In fact, he looked almost bored. "Here," he said simply, his voice low, but not unkind. The queen was confused. This wasn't the harsh welcome she had been expecting. She had been prepared to face humiliation, punishment, and anger. Instead, the human spoke to her as if she were just another visitor in his home. "Is this how your people treat prisoners?" the queen asked, her voice sharp. Trying to maintain some dignity, the human studied her for a moment, his eyes showing no sign of fear. "Prisoners?" He chuckled softly. "I don't treat prisoners like that. You're a guest here for now." The queen was stunned. How could a human look at her as a guest? She was an enemy, a prisoner, someone who had been sent to him as a form of punishment. She had expected to be locked away in a dark cell, ignored, and treated as less than nothing. But the warlord didn't act as if she were less than him at all. "What do you mean?" she demanded, her voice growing more defensive. The warlord stepped closer, though not in a threatening way. "You're not my enemy. I don't know what kind of punishment you were supposed to receive, but I don't believe in cruelty for the sake of cruelty. I believe in understanding." The queen couldn't understand. Her people had always treated their enemies with disdain, never showing any form of kindness or understanding. She had been taught that strength came from power, from keeping others, in fear, from showing no mercy. But here, standing in front of her, was someone who seemed to have none of those qualities, and yet he didn't seem weak. He didn't seem afraid. He seemed calm. She didn't know how to react. All her life, she had been taught to fear humans. They were warriors, conquerors, destroyers. Yet this man didn't act like one. He spoke to her as if she was someone important. He treated her like she mattered. The queen took a step back, trying to find a way to regain control of the situation. But the warlord wasn't done. "I don't expect you to trust me right away," he said, his voice gentle. "If you are willing to accept it, you will have everything you need here. Food, shelter, even company if you wish. We'll have your own space. You can stay as long as you want." The queen's eyes narrowed. She had never been offered such freedom, such a choice. Her people never allowed their enemies to make decisions for themselves. They were always treated as less than they were. But here was a human, offering her more than her own people ever had. It confused her. It made her question everything she had ever believed about humans. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The human didn't answer immediately. Instead, he smiled softly and turned to a window, looking out over the gray horizon. Because not everything is about power. Not everything is about control. Sometimes it's about understanding and the willingness to treat others as equals. The queen stared at him. This human was different. She had no idea why he was showing her this kind of treatment, but one thing was clear: she wasn't going to be treated the way she had expected. For the first time, the queen felt unsure of herself. The humans were supposed to be cruel, heartless, and merciless. But this human had done nothing to make her feel weak or lesser. In fact, he had made her feel seen. Was it possible that everything she had been taught about humans was wrong? She didn't know yet. but she had a feeling her time with this human might be different from anything she had ever experienced. As she stood there, in that room with the human, she wondered what this new journey would bring. Would she find a way to escape? Would she find a way to fight back? Or would she begin to understand what he meant when he spoke of equality? One thing was certain, the story between her and this human was just beginning. And the queen had no idea where it would lead. The queen sat quietly in the large room, watching the human as he moved around the house. It had been a few days since her arrival, and though she had spent most of her time alone in her quarters, she had started to notice small things about the human that made her wonder. He had been respectful, kind, and even patient with her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was not right. Why was he treating her like this? A human. Didn't see her as a prisoner, but as a guest. The queen had never known this kind of treatment. It felt strange to her. Every time she tried to challenge him, he would answer with calmness, never raising his voice, never showing anger. This was not what she expected. This wasn't how prisoners were treated. He had given her a space of her own, a comfortable bed, and even food that she didn't have to beg for. She wasn't used to this. She had been trained to survive as a queen, to lead her people with strength and fear. She had been taught that showing weakness was a danger, but here, in this place, there was no danger, no fear. The first time they had spoken, she had expected harsh words, but instead, he simply asked, "How are you?" in a way that made her feel like her answer mattered. It was a small question, but it left her unsure of how to respond. She wasn't used to being asked how she felt, especially not by a human. It made her uncomfortable, but at the same time, it made her feel ... important. After a few days, the queen decided to take matters into her own hands. She had to know why this human was acting this way. He was the enemy. He was supposed to break her spirit, not offer her a life of peace. She needed answers, and she would get them. One morning, when the human was sitting at a table, reading something on a screen, the queen walked up to him. She stood there for a moment, not sure how to begin. Finally, she asked, "Why are you being so kind to me?" The human didn't look up from the screen at first. He paused and then slowly placed it down, giving her his full attention. "Why not?" he asked simply. "Because ... Mere enemy," the queen replied. "I'm a prisoner. I was sent to you as punishment." The human leaned back in his chair and sighed. "I see," he said. "But just because you're a prisoner doesn't mean you're less of a person. I treat others how I want to be treated. I know you're here because of what happened to you, but that doesn't make you less worthy of respect." The queen felt a strange warmth in her chest. She had never been spoken to like this before. Her people, her own kind, had always used her power to control others, to show them their place. But this human, this enemy, was showing her something different. Something she wasn't sure she understood. "Why do you do it?" she asked again. "Why show me kindness when you could have treated me however you wanted?" The human smiled slightly, and this time there was no pride or arrogance in his expression. "Just a quiet understanding, because everyone deserves respect," he said simply, "even if someone is my enemy. We can't grow or learn from hatred. We can only learn from respect." The queen stared at him for a long moment. She had always believed that showing mercy was a weakness, but he was showing her something she had never seen before. That strength could also come from kindness. She didn't know how to respond, so she simply nodded and walked away, her mind spinning. Over the next few days, the queen's curiosity about the human grew. She began to watch him more closely, studying his actions and words. He never treated her like a prisoner. He never demanded anything of her. In fact, he often offered her choices, letting her decide how she spent her time. Some days, he would ask if she wanted to join him for dinner. Other days, he would ask if she wanted to explore the house or the garden. She didn't have to do any of these things, but she found herself agreeing more often than not. At first, she had hesitated, unsure if it was wise to accept his offers. But as the days passed, she started to feel a strange sense of comfort. She was no longer treated like a prisoner or a punishment. She was treated as a guest who mattered. One afternoon, After a long walk in the garden, the queen sat down beside the human on a bench. The human smiled at her, but it wasn't the kind of smile she had expected. It wasn't mocking or condescending. It was warm, as if he was glad to have her there. "I'm not used to this," she said, looking away. "I've always been told that strength is in control and power. But you don't seem to need that." The human chuckled. "You don't have to be strong all the time, you know. Strength comes in many forms. It's not just about control. Sometimes it's about knowing when to let go, when to trust." She looked at him in surprise. "Trust?" He nodded. "Yes. Trusting others, even when it's hard. It takes more strength to trust than to control." The queen was quiet for a moment, thinking about his words. For the first time in her life, she began to see the truth in them. Perhaps, just perhaps, strength wasn't only about fear and power. It was about something deeper. Something she had never allowed herself to understand before. As the sun began to set, the queen realized that her time here was changing her in ways she had never expected. The human's kindness was slowly breaking down the walls she had built. Around herself, she didn't know what would happen next. But one thing was clear: this was no ordinary punishment. The queen had always believed that strength meant control. It was how she had been raised, how she had ruled her people. But with each passing day, she found herself questioning everything she had ever known. The human warlord, the one who was supposed to humiliate her, had done nothing but show her kindness. It confused her, made her feel uneasy. She didn't know what to make of it. Was this a trap? Was he trying to weaken her spirit so he could crush her in some cruel way? But as she watched him, day after day, something inside her began to change. He never raised his voice, never demanded anything from her. Instead, he treated her as if she mattered, as if her thoughts, her feelings, were important. For the first time, the queen felt what it was like to be treated with respect, to be seen as more than just a tool for power. One evening, the queen sat by the window, staring out at the stars. The human warlord had asked her to join him for dinner, but she had declined. She didn't feel like eating, not because she wasn't hungry, but because something inside her felt ... strange. She wasn't used to these feelings: doubt, confusion. She had been trained to believe that power was everything, that showing weakness was a sign of defeat. Yet here she was, alone with her thoughts. Wondering if she had been wrong all this time, the human's voice interrupted her thoughts. "You seem distant today," he said gently. "Are you all right?" The queen turned to see him standing in the doorway. His expression was calm, without any hint of impatience. He was simply concerned. It was the same look he had given her since the day she arrived, one of kindness, of understanding. "I'm fine," she said. Though she wasn't. She didn't want to admit it, but she wasn't fine at all. She felt lost, unsure of who she was becoming. The walls she had built around her heart were starting to crack. She wasn't sure how to stop it. "You don't have to hide your feelings," the human said, walking over to her. "If something's bothering you, we can talk about it." For a moment, the queen didn't respond. She had never allowed herself to talk about her feelings. Not with anyone, not even her closest allies. Her people had always valued strength over everything else, and expressing doubt or uncertainty was seen as a weakness. But this human, this man who had shown her nothing but kindness, was offering her something different. He was offering her a chance to be heard, to be understood. I'm not sure I understand anymore," she said quietly. "All my life, I've been taught that power is everything. I've been taught that control is what keeps you strong. But you ... You don't seem to believe that. I don't know what to think." The human sat beside her, his eyes soft with understanding. "You're right. Power and control are often the tools we use to hide our fears, our insecurities. But real strength, the kind that matters, comes from within. It's about knowing who you are and being able to stand firm in that knowledge no matter what." For the queen looked at him, her heart heavy with confusion. "But how can you be strong if you don't have control, if you don't make others fear you?" The human smiled, but it wasn't a smug or cruel smile. It was warm, reassuring. "Strength isn't about fear, it's about choice. It's about showing compassion and respect to others even when you don't have to." It's about being brave enough to trust others and to let them trust you. The queen turned away, looking out the window again. She had never thought of strength in this way. The idea was new to her, and it made her feel vulnerable. She had always prided herself on being untouchable, on being someone who commanded respect through fear. But now, she wasn't so sure. "I've never had anyone trust me like you do," she admitted, her voice soft. "I don't know what to do with that. I've always been the one in control, the one giving orders. Out. I don't know how to be anything else." The human's voice was gentle but firm. "You don't have to be anything else. Just be yourself. You're more than your past. You're more than the title you once held. You have the power to choose who you want to be now." The queen didn't respond immediately. She was lost in thought, trying to make sense of what he had said. She had always thought that her identity was tied to her role as a queen, to the power she held over others. But now, for the first time, she was starting to see that maybe she was more than that. Maybe there was more to her than the crown she had once worn. As the days passed, the queen began to spend more time with the human. They talked about many things about their lives, about the worlds they had come from, about the things they both cared about. She learned more about him, about his past, his values, his family. He was unlike anyone she had ever met. He was strong, yes, but not in the way she had always understood strength. He didn't seek to control others. Instead, he sought to understand them, to help them. And with each conversation, the queen felt herself changing. The walls she had built around her heart began to crumble, piece by piece. She still wasn't sure what to make of her feelings. But one thing was clear: this human, this warlord, was not like the others. He was something different, something ... good. For the first time, the queen began to wonder if her past beliefs were wrong. She had been taught that strength came from power, from fear. But this human was showing her that strength could come from kindness, from understanding. It was a lesson she never expected to learn, and it was one she wasn't sure she was ready for. But as the days passed, the queen felt herself drawn to him, not as a prisoner, but as someone who had finally found someone worthy of trust. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, the queen found herself becoming more and more comfortable in the human's presence. The walls she had built around her heart, the walls she had spent her life carefully constructing, were slowly crumbling. She had expected to be treated with cruelty, expected to be broken by this human, but instead, she found peace. A place she never thought she would find. The human was still kind, still respectful, but there was more now. There was an understanding between them, something that went beyond words. They had shared so many conversations, so many quiet moments, that the queen began to see him not as an enemy or a warlord, but as a person. A person who had chosen to be different, to show her kindness instead of cruelty. At first, she had only stayed to watch, to observe. She had thought it was a game, that he would show his true nature eventually. But with time, she realized that this human had no hidden agenda. He wasn't trying to break her spirit or gain power over her. He wasn't trying to manipulate her. Instead, he was offering her something she had never known: genuine respect. One evening, as the queen sat with him, the soft hum of the house filling the background, he looked at her with the same calm expression that had become so familiar. To her, "I've noticed something," he said, his voice gentle. "You've changed." The queen looked at him in surprise. She wasn't sure how to respond. She hadn't realized that he had been paying attention to the small ways she had started to let down her guard. "I've learned a lot," she said softly, her voice hesitant. "About strength, about trust, ... about myself."
Ow.
The human smiled. But it wasn't just a smile of approval. It was a smile of understanding, one that reached his eyes. "It's a good start," he said. "Sometimes the hardest part is realizing we have more to learn." The queen looked down, her fingers tracing the edges of the table where they sat. "I never thought I could learn something from you," she said quietly. "I never thought I could learn anything from a human." The human leaned back in his chair, folding his arms in front of him. "It's strange, isn't it? How we sometimes learn the most from the people we least expect." She nodded slowly, her mind swirling with questions and emotions she had never allowed herself to feel. but just as she began to feel a sense of calm, the quiet of the house was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. The human rose to answer it, his expression unchanged. The queen remained seated, an unease settling in her stomach. The door opened, and 2 soldiers stepped inside. They were not the human soldiers she had come to know. These were different. They were serious, their eyes cold and calculating. The queen's heart skipped a beat. She knew immediately who they were. They were emissaries from her own people. "Your Majesty," one of them said, bowing low, "it's time for you to return. The council demands your presence." The queen's breath caught in her throat. Her people, they had not forgotten her. They had sent emissaries to bring her back. She had been expecting this, but the sudden reality of it felt like a blow. The human warlord stood still, his face calm, but his eyes betraying a flicker of concern. "She's not going anywhere," he said firmly. The emissaries looked at each other, their expressions cold. "You have no say in the matter, human," one of them said. "The queen must return to her people. Her punishment is over." The queen stood up slowly, her mind racing. She had never imagined that she would be torn between 2 worlds. She had been raised to obey the will of her people, to follow their commands without question. But now, after everything she had experienced, she was faced with a difficult choice. Her people had sent her away to be punished. But this human, this warlord, had shown her a kindness, a respect that she had never known. "I don't want to go back," the queen said quietly, her voice barely a whisper. The words seemed to hang in the air, and the emissaries looked at her with confusion. They had never expected her to say such a thing. The queen had always been obedient, always followed the orders of her people. But now, in this moment, she realized that she didn't have to follow their will. She could choose. She could choose her own path. The human's gaze softened, and he stepped forward. "You don't have to go back. You don't owe them anything. You can stay here with me." The queen's heart raced as she looked at him. She had never expected to hear those words, not from him. She had always seen him as someone who had to follow the rules, someone who had to obey orders. But now, he was offering her something else, freedom. The emissaries didn't wait for her response. "The council will not be pleased," one of them said sharply. "We have our orders." The queen took a deep breath, her decision becoming clearer with each passing moment. She looked at the human, his calm expression still offering her a sense of safety. "Then let them be displeased," she said, her voice steady. "I am not returning. I have made my choice." The emissaries stood in stunned silence, but the queen stood tall, the weight of her decision pressing down on her. This was the moment she had been dreading, the moment when she had to choose between loyalty to her people and loyalty to herself. And for the first time, she chose herself. The air in the room grew tense after the queen's declaration. The emissaries from her people stood in stunned silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. They had come to take her back, to bring her before the council, but now they were faced with a decision they hadn't expected. The queen, their once proud ruler, was refusing to return. The human warlord stood beside her, his expression firm. "She stays here," he said again, his voice calm but unyielding. "She doesn't belong to anyone but herself." The emissaries exchanged uneasy glances. They had not anticipated this. They had come with orders, clear and unambiguous. But the queen's refusal was something they hadn't prepared for. The woman who had once commanded fleets and ruled with an iron fist was now standing against her own people. "You cannot make this choice for her," one of the emissaries said, his voice tight with frustration. "She is the property of the council. Her fate is not hers to decide." The queen turned to face the emissaries, her eyes hardening. "I am no longer their property," she said, her voice steady, though her heart beat fast. "I have made my choice. I choose to stay here with him." The words felt strange to her, but they were true. She had always been taught to obey, to follow orders without question. But now, for the first time in her life, she was defying her people. She had been a prisoner in her own life, forced to play a role she didn't want. But with the human, she was free. She was free to make decisions for herself. The human's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a silent gesture of support. She could feel his presence beside her, steady and reassuring. He wasn't forcing her to stay. He was simply giving her the space to make her own decision. He had never treated her as a prisoner, and now, in this moment, he was showing her that. The choice was hers. The emissaries remained silent for a long moment, their expressions unreadable. Then, with a final glance at the queen, he turned and walked toward the door. "You will regret this," one of them muttered, before they left the room. As the door closed behind them, the queen let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. The decision had been made. There was no turning back now. She had chosen her own path, and though she didn't know where it would lead, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The human looked at her, his gaze softening. "You did well," he said quietly. "You don't have to regret this. It's your life now." The queen nodded, though her mind was still racing. She had never imagined she would be in this position. She had always thought her fate was tied to her people, to her role as a queen. But now, for the first time, she felt like she was in control of her own destiny. She wasn't a prisoner. She wasn't a tool to be used by her people. She was her own person, and she had chosen to stay here with the human who had shown her kindness and respect. But even as she stood there, the weight of her decision pressing down on her, she knew that there would be consequences. Her people wouldn't just let her go. The council would not forgive her disobedience. There would be a price to pay for defying them, and she wasn't sure what it would be. "You're sure about this?" the human asked, his voice low. They won't just leave this alone. They'll come after you, and they'll come after me." The queen turned to face him, meeting his gaze with newfound resolve. "I'm sure," she said. "I don't want to go back. I've spent my life serving them, obeying them, and it's led me nowhere. They've always seen me as a tool, a weapon. But I'm not just a weapon. I'm a person. And I choose to live for myself now." The human nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Then we'll face it together. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together." The queen felt a strange sense of comfort at his words. She didn't know what the future would hold, but for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. She had chosen this path, and though it would be difficult, she knew she wouldn't have to walk it alone that night. The queen and the human sat together in silence, watching the stars outside. The world seemed quiet, as if holding its breath. The queen wasn't sure what would come next. She didn't know if the council would send more emissaries, or if they would send an army to bring her back. But in that moment, she didn't care. She had made her choice, and for the first time in her life, it felt like the right one. She turned to the human, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly, "for giving me this chance." The human smiled, a warm, reassuring smile. "You didn't need me to give you a chance. You just needed to believe in yourself." The queen smiled back, the weight on her shoulders feeling a little lighter. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she was ready to face it. Whatever it might bring. Days passed after the queen's bold decision, and life continued in the house. The human was kind, as always, treating her with the respect she had never known. But despite the calmness of their days, the queen knew that her decision was not without consequences. She had chosen to stay with him, to refuse the demands of her people. It was a decision that would change everything. And she wasn't sure if it was the right one. Her mind raced with worry, though she tried to hide it from the human. She couldn't ignore the reality of what would happen next. Her people wouldn't let this go. They would send more emissaries, or worse, they would send an army to bring her back. And the human, the one who had shown her kindness, would be caught in the middle of it. She had already seen the look of concern in his eyes when he had spoken of the consequences. One evening, as they sat at the table together, the queen couldn't keep the thoughts to herself any longer. "I've made my choice," she said quietly, her eyes downcast. "But I know that my people won't let me stay here without a fight. They'll come for me, and they'll come for you." The human looked up at her, his expression calm, though she could see the worry in his eyes. "I know," he said, "and I'm ready for it. We don't have to face this alone. We'll stand together." The queen stared at him, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and fear. She had never expected anyone to stand by her like this. She had been raised to lead alone, to rule with strength and fear, but this human, This person who had once been her enemy was offering her something different. He was offering his loyalty, his support. And though it made her feel vulnerable, she also knew that it was something she had never truly experienced before. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. "This isn't just about me anymore. They won't hesitate to destroy everything to get me back. They'll see you as a threat, just as much as they see me as one." The human's voice was steady, "I'm sure. Whatever happens next, we'll face it together. You're not alone in this." The queen looked at him, her mind still swirling with doubt. She had lived her life with a sense of duty to her people, and now, for the first time, she was faced with the choice of leaving them behind. She didn't want to go back, but she also didn't want to bring harm to the one person who had shown her kindness. It was a difficult choice, and it weighed heavily on her heart. "I've always been taught that loyalty to my people comes first," she said, her voice filled with conflict. "But now I wonder if I've been wrong all this time." The human reached out and placed a hand gently on hers. "Loyalty is important," he said, "but loyalty to yourself is just as important. You have to decide what kind of person you want to be, and that's a choice only you can make." The queen nodded slowly, feeling a deep sense of understanding in his words. She had spent so many years following orders, doing what was expected of her, never questioning the path set before her. But now she realized she had the power to choose. And it wasn't just about the human, it was about her own life, her own future. "I want to be more than just a tool for my people," she said, her voice stronger now. "I want to be someone who chooses their own path. And for the first time, I feel like I can." The human smiled, his eyes warm with approval. "That's the most important choice you'll ever make. I'll be here to help you every step of the way." The queen felt a weight lift from her shoulders, as if a burden she had carried for years had been set down. She had made the right choice. She wasn't alone anymore. No matter what her people would send, no matter what challenges they would face, she knew she could stand with the human. Together they would face whatever came next. The next few days were quiet, but the queen couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. She could feel the weight of her decision pressing down on her, and she knew that her people wouldn't give up so easily. They would come, and they would want her back, but she was ready now. She wasn't the same person who had arrived on this planet. She had changed, and she was no longer willing to be a pawn in her people's game. One night, as the stars shone brightly outside the window, the human turned to her. "You don't have to worry about what comes next," he said softly. "Be ready for whatever they send, and we'll face it together, like we've always done." The queen felt a sense of peace settle in her heart. She had made her decision, and she had chosen her own future. No longer would she be ruled by fear, by the expectations of others. She was free to live her life as she saw fit, and with the human by her side. She knew that anything was possible. "We're ready," she said, her voice filled with determination. "Let them come. We'll stand strong." And so, with the human beside her, the queen faced the future with newfound strength. She no longer feared what was to come. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, and for the first time, she felt a sense of hope for the future. The queen stood by the window, her eyes fixed on the horizon. The human warlord had left the room a few moments ago, and now she was alone with her thoughts. The weight of her decision was still heavy on her shoulders, but for the first time, she didn't feel burdened by it. She had made the right choice. She had chosen herself, chosen freedom, and now there was no turning back. But even as she stood there, a part of her couldn't help but feel the weight of what was to come. Her people wouldn't let her go so easily. They would send their armies, their fleets, and their emissaries to bring her back. The queen had known this from the moment she made her decision. The council wouldn't forgive her disobedience. They would see her as a traitor, someone who had broken the laws that bound her people together. But no matter what happened, she wouldn't go back. She had made her choice, and she would stand by it. She felt a hand on her shoulder, gentle yet strong. The human stood beside her, looking out the window with her. His presence was comforting, and in that moment, she knew she wasn't alone. "We'll face it together," the human said, his voice calm but firm. "Whatever happens, we'll face it side by side." The queen turned to look at him, her heart filled with gratitude. "I'm not afraid of what's coming," she said, her voice steady. I know they won't stop until they get what they want. But I won't go back. Not now. Not ever. The human smiled, his eyes filled with admiration. I know, and I'll be here with you every step of the way. For a moment they stood in silence, their hands lightly touching. The queen had never known this kind of support, this kind of loyalty. It was more than just protection. It was something deeper. It was a bond they had formed, built on trust and respect. And no matter what came next, she knew they would face it together. Days passed, and the tension in the air grew stronger. Her people were coming. She could sense it in the way the human prepared their defenses, in the way he moved with purpose, as if he already knew what was coming. He was ready for it. So was she. One afternoon, the sound of a ship's engines reached the queen's ears. It was distant at first, a low hum on the edge of her hearing, but as it grew louder, she knew. The emissaries had returned, and they had brought reinforcements. The queen turned to the human, her face set in determination. They've come, she said quietly. They won't stop until they have me back. The human nodded, his face unreadable. We won't let them take you. We'll stand our ground. The queen looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't running. He was standing with her, ready to face whatever came next. She had never known such loyalty, such strength. We'll fight if we have to, the queen said, her voice firm. But I won't let them take me. Not again. The human nodded again, his eyes filled with resolve. We won't let them take you. We'll face whatever they send, and we'll show them that you're no one's to command anymore. As the ship drew closer, the queen felt the tension in her chest tighten. Her heart beat faster, and her mind raced with thoughts of what was to come. She didn't know if they would win. She didn't know if they could stand against the full might of her people. But she knew one thing: she would not go back, not without a fight. The human placed a hand on her arm, his touch steady and comforting. You don't have to do this. Alone, I'll be with you. And together, we'll make sure they know that you have the power to choose your own future. The queen looked into his eyes, her heart swelling with emotion. Thank you, she whispered, for everything. He smiled softly, his voice filled with warmth. You don't need to thank me. This is what we do. We stand together. The queen took a deep breath, her body readying for what was to come. She wasn't afraid anymore. She had made her choice, and she wasn't going to back down. The human had shown her that true strength didn't come from fear, from control, or from domination. It came from standing by those you cared about, from trusting others, and from believing in yourself. As the ship landed, the queen stood tall, her posture proud. The doors of the house opened, and she stepped outside. The humans stood beside her, ready to face whatever came next. The emissaries stepped out of the ship, their faces cold and stern. They had come for the queen, and they would stop at nothing to take her back. But the queen stood her ground, her heart steady, her resolve unshaken. She had made her decision. She was ready to face the consequences. One of the emissaries stepped forward, his voice filled with authority. You are to come with us, Your Majesty. The council demands it. The queen's voice rang out with clarity and strength. I will not go back. I have made my choice. I will not be a prisoner any longer. I am free, and I will stay here with him. The emissary's eyes narrowed, but the queen stood her ground. She knew that this would not be easy, that the battle ahead would be difficult. But with the human beside her, she was ready to face it all. Together, they would show her people that they couldn't control her anymore. The queen turned to the human, her heart full of gratitude. Let them come, she said. We'll face it together. And so, as the emissaries looked on in disbelief, the queen and the human stood side by side, ready to face the future with strength, courage, and the unwavering belief that their bond was unbreakable.